Hi, I'm Ann Rieselbach, the League's Program Director, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's FF Distance Edition presentation hosted by W Architecture and Landscape Architects, Barbara Wilks' Brooklyn-based practice. The FF series is an online reinvention of the League's in-person First Friday receptions, tours, and project reviews. Like First Fridays, these programs provide the opportunity to get a sense of the studio culture, to see where and how firms are working. The online format also expands the scope of these events beyond the office walls, including the chance to virtually visit project sites. The 2021-22 series features design practices that are redefining the public landscape by responding to social and environmental concerns and exploring the intersections of architecture, technology, and ecology. Next month's session will visit the studio and projects of the San Francisco Future Firms. By then, we'll be ready to announce the winter-spring schedule, which will also include some in-person site visits, which we will probably roll out after the snow melts. While you wait for spring, you can find videos of the full 2020-2021 season on the League's website. Tonight's program will be introduced and moderated by Christopher Hawthorne, who is Chief Design Officer for the City of Los Angeles, a new position created by Mayor Eric Garcetti. Prior to joining City Hall, he was architecture critic for the Los Angeles Times for over a decade. Christopher also teaches at the USC Dormside College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences, where he directs the Third Los Angeles Project, a series of public conversations about architecture, urban planning, mobility, and demographic change in Southern California. Following the presentation and Christopher's conversation with Barbara and her team, the discussion will be open to all attendees, at which point we hope you'll turn on your cameras or put them back on because you should keep them off during the presentation, as well as your microphones. You can pose your questions in the chat section, and if you feel comfortable doing so, we invite you to ask them in person. Before we begin, a quick thanks to the League sponsors. This program is supported in part by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and the New York State Legislature, the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as by the League's members, whose annual support makes all of our programs and events possible. Please visit archleague.org for further information about membership and the League's upcoming and past programs. We have an extensive archive of videos, images, and texts on our website. And finally, towards the end of the program, information will be posted in the chat section for those of you seeking CEU.
Thanks so much, Anne. It's a real pleasure to be back. Thanks so much, Anne. It's a real pleasure to be back doing another League program. It's just a few months ago that I was able to do a similar program with the LA firm LA Moss. So I just want to say hello to everyone from Southern California, where it's still light out, at least for another hour or so. I'm pleased to be able to introduce Barbara, who will in turn introduce her colleagues. It looks like 5 of them are with her this evening from the W team. Before I do that, a couple further housekeeping notes. We will, in terms of the run of show for this evening, we'll hear a presentation from Barbara and team. At around 6:55 or so, I'll come back to join Barbara and her colleagues in conversation for a few minutes. We will then open it up to audience questions around 7:15 or so. And as Anne mentioned, please feel free during any point in the conversation to add questions to the chat. There also may be an opportunity for you to turn on your cameras and ask your questions directly. We'll see how things go. And then we will hand it back to Anne, who will wrap things up by about 7:30 or so. So now on to our featured guests this evening. Barbara Wilks is principal and founder of W Architecture and Landscape Architecture. She began her career as an architect with a degree in architecture from Cornell, yet soon realized that her interests in public space were closely aligned with the profession of landscape architecture as well. Earning an MLA at the midpoint in her career from the University of Pennsylvania, she founded her new firm in the fall of 1999 in New York City. As an architect and a landscape architect, she uses her leadership skills to realign nature and the city, and I'm curious to ask a little bit about what that means. I'm sure we'll see some examples in the projects that will be shared with us this evening. Those projects range in scale from urban plans to public spaces and parks to infrastructure to architecture, and also include speculative projects, as I believe we're going to hear about this evening a little bit, Barbara serves on a long list of nonprofit and museum boards and has been elected to both the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Architects and the American Society of Landscape Architecture for her design accomplishments. And she is currently teaching landscape architecture at the University of Pennsylvania. For my part, I had the chance to meet and get to know Barbara a couple of years ago when we both served on the jury to select a master plan for the Page Museum and La Brea Tar Pits here in Los Angeles, right next to LACMA and very close to the new Academy Museum that has just opened at the old May Company building on the Miracle Mile in Los Angeles. That master plan job went happily, I think both of us felt, to Weiss Manfredi. And that's a project that continues to evolve with all kinds of really terrific potential. So it's a pleasure to have the chance to be in conversation with her and her colleagues this evening. And now I will hand it over to Barbara.
You have to share the screen. Right?
Where there?
Okay, so put it on. Hi, thanks, Christopher. Our office is a community, together on an adventure, as we explore New York's 520-mile waterfront, longer than Miami, Boston, and San Francisco combined. We look for ways to engage it while having a little fun. Most of our projects involve water as an edge condition, as stormwater management, as recreation, as habitat, as a gathering place for people. Its still wild presence heralds nature in the city and connects people to each other as well as to a sense of place. The movement of water creates erosion, sedimentation, deposition. We study these forces and bring them in to let them affect our work. We had a lot of fun putting together this presentation to share with you tonight and hope you enjoy it. I want to thank the Architectural League for the opportunity, and we are honored to be here. And Christopher, it's so nice to see you again. As a part of our preparation for this presentation, we put together this timeline. The series of projects and ideas hold us together, and as we continue to explore them in concert and individually, each person brings their spirit to the task. We will come back to this timeline later because first I want to introduce the people. They make everything possible, so let me introduce the team. Keeping us all together is Laquita, our business manager, who has been with us almost the whole 20 years. Besides HR, bookkeeping, and office maintenance, she is also in charge of birthdays and other parties. She is the glue. Lanka is our architect, now working on the water taxi terminal under construction in the Inner Harbor in Baltimore. Situated on a pier and lifted out of the rising floodwaters, this terminal and museum will serve the USS Constellation once it moves back at the end of construction. This is Julia at Open House New York, back before the pandemic, where she gave tours of 50 West Street, even in the rain. This is the private residence terrace with its spectacular view, but we also designed the more intimate public plaza below. Julia has organized our Zero Waste Challenge and completed over 5 park renovations this year. David is here on our site visit to the Riverline in Buffalo, one of the few places we visited during the pandemic. With over 35 years experience, David is also our office quality control, working with all the teams on most projects to make sure they are well detailed and constructed. Chi is one of our lead designers, here in the office working on a simple model as part of the design process. He also helped catalog our New York City projects for the Open House New York visit on the wall beyond his desk. She is our videographer, I guess that's a word, for this presentation. And lately she's been working with David on the Riverline in Buffalo and Bush Terminal here in New York City, for which she did this rendering. And our latest hire, Zoe, is learning fast, working on our waterfront on the Harlem River, but she also wanted to know more about our work and did some research that you will hear about later. And lastly, our team includes all the consultants and clients that we work with. They are key to making a successful project. So where does all this work happen?
Our office is in a historical building in downtown Brooklyn, where creative new ideas bump into spontaneous culture and history. Here, diverse people meet diverse urban environments. Plazas, streets, small parks, and new developments are blended into one context and generates the energy of urban life. We experience the dynamic urban spaces while we design with them. Here we're at 374 Fulton Street, Brooklyn. We share the same home with the very famous restaurant Rich and Toner, which was opened in 1879 to 2004 and just returned. Walking upstairs, we share a large studio where we work together on different projects every day and have our little discussions. We love the space allowing us to communicate with each other easily and quick. Downstairs, we meet at our library with a collection of books and materials. Our kitchen is a great lunch place and the conference room where we gather for all the meetings and having design charrettes.
Thanks, Chi. Now Zoe's going to give us a little introduction to W.
Yeah, so as a newcomer to W, I sought to kind of learn more about the firm's work and history. So I looked at the past 20 years of projects across New York City. This is a map that's in our office to sort of understand and quantify the impact. What I found was that W's planted over 5,300 trees across New York City, ranging from a large-scale reforestation project to small plazas, and has planted in total what equals 10 square New York City blocks of planted area across the city. 1.5 acres of that is planted rooftop specifically. And so while each project brings its own specific impact based on context, place, etc., this collective image really shows a lot. Those 5,300 trees are working to divert 10 million gallons of stormwater every year and sequester 128 tons of direct carbon capture. So this was a fun way to sort of see the whole picture of the firm and sort of bridge the larger scale thinking around issues of carbon sequestration, stormwater management in the city to sort of day-to-day that goes into the built work.
Thanks, Zoe. So that's by the numbers, but how are our projects different? What are they about?
We always start with context. We listen to the people, the site, and mapping. Environmental and cultural issues, though sometimes imagined as separate, must now start to work together. Their new interrelationship lays the foundation for making a new plan. Our projects are at many scales. Making scale comparisons is a key part of our design process. These are all our projects. What is this place about? How does it fit in? Here, for instance, this site is a part of the Chesapeake Bay Tidewater, the industrial Baltimore Harbor, and a series of places in the former Procter & Gamble factory, all at the same time. We also look across time scales, from the historical to the present and future. Climate change, sea level rise, and constantly changing ecosystems are all considered when we envision the future. Then we ask how it fits into our past work. How can we build on what came before?
Thanks, Julia. Using this timeline, which shows a selected history of our 20 years' work, we hope to show you tonight how our work and ideas accumulate and evolve. The foundation is the Waterfront Edge project, shown at the bottom of the page. In these projects, we worked out the importance of thickening the edge, adding layers of habitat and a diversity of places, expanding space for both people and other species. From this grew some speculative projects, taking these edge strategies into systems, which grew into some larger planning work around the world. Finally, we will end with a few of our larger projects in North America, which often begin with a competition. In these projects, we get to go beyond the edge and explore the manipulation of entire landscapes and their various systems, especially hydrology. So let's start with part one and two of our waterfront projects that began our practice. West Harlem Piers Park is on the tidal Hudson and is our collaboration with We Act for Environmental Justice for New York City EDC. This community had been working for over 30 years to get access to the Hudson, and we became their advocates. For us, this was our first chance to go beyond the bulkhead, and it was New York City's first new piers in over 40 years. We wanted to privilege natural forces, not the city, so the piers go out at angles to the shore like waves, not on the city grid. This place had been a cove, a place of deposition. You can see here a few diagrams from the master plan, which preceded the project, where the new piers were floated in along the edge like driftwood. After a year of planning, we started the real project, and as the community focused on the site, they told us they wanted to see water at the end of 125th Street, not piers. So we rearranged, and our new plan floats out a pier to expand the land, but breaks it in the middle where 125th Street pierces it. In the aerial, you can see how that works with the diagonal of 125th Street, as well as the street grid, and creates a series of loops for people to investigate. The geometry also helps provide improved pedestrian access, drawing people out to the piers. We picked up additional space for the park by narrowing the adjacent roadway. The community wanted a gathering space, and we needed to find all the space we could, as the site was no wider than a tennis court. We made 3 new ecologies in the former parking lot: a pier, a cove, and a woodland. We added piers to link the land and water, and expanded the park area, not in old historical patterns, but in new water-based patterns. Here you see the pier coming in and extending onto the land, linking land and water, blurring the boundary. Then you see how the diagonals expand the space and provide for a variety of pathways and loops. The cove is a place to foster engagement. It includes a series of events along it, like this water feature set within the sloping dune lawns. The flexible space of the cove allows for diverse activities, including WEAC's Green Movie Night. And the woodland is a quieter place for enjoying the waterfront, with the crunch of softer paving and more planting, the bike path buffering you from the roadway. The former parking lot is marked by new art by Neri Ward, with community voices about the sounds heard there. He also made other voices, these stainless steel figures that recall the threading guides of fishing lines, which people love to play with in the park. And the fishing still continues. The materials include historic blocks from the bulkhead, reused as seating in the woodland as we took them out for the new piers. We also discovered cobblestones under the asphalt and used them in new swales to direct water away. And we used signage written by local historian Eric Washington to provide more information on the history of the place, which used to be called Manhattanville. So we brought increased biological diversity and provided amenities to increase cultural diversity. Our work checked all the right boxes, and indeed, this is a successful and well-used park that I'm very proud of. However, as I look back on it, is it sustainable in the face of climate change? Can it adapt? To answer this, we looked to one more element of the design in the river. As part of the mitigation for the new piers, we added 50 reef balls to the river, each with 500 square feet of surface area, the first such project in the city. Since that time, oysters and fish have increased dramatically. The river landscape is growing and evolving in a way that the land side is not. The river life is increasingly diverse and sustainable. How can we bring this dynamism into our upland landscapes? How can we give nature agency as a part of regular city life? Working on the edge on the East River in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, a few years later, we similarly used local geometries to define the plan by creating an axis across the river to the Empire State Building. We improved access to the river and pedestrianized streets, created a variety of piers, and renewed the waterfront. We created a diversity of habitats, some over structure, some upland, some along the shore's edge. And this is where we realized there was some potential to bring a sort of living shoreline into the project. At the riprap shoreline, nature has over time begun to develop on its own, sprouting volunteer trees and shrubs. This idea of creating multiple management structures within one project, even a small one like this, creates more dynamic and sustainable landscapes. We need to include dynamic, changing landscapes in our designs and educate our clients and the public on the advantage of these messy landscapes for the environment and for us. The new way of thinking about maintenance will be critical to future resilience.
So Zoe and I are starting on another project on the Harlem River. While they're not along the same river as the edge shown here in the video, which is on the East River, the two sites actually share a lot of similarities. They're both very tight spaces in post-industrial settings, disconnected from the upland with a lot going on. At the edge here, we were able to reconnect the waterfront back to the Williamsburg neighborhood, and it is now a key portal to ferry commuters during the week and visitors coming to the Brooklyn flea market on weekends. What works and what doesn't, and non-human species occupy our landscapes. In this case, we've gone back recently to see how the variety of environments is integrated in a not very large site. We also wanted to see how the waterfront can be a series of places for biking, walking, and fishing, and as well as a place for plants and wildlife. Besides looking at what has worked in the past, we also are always looking for opportunity to implement different ideas to create unique places. For example, at the edge, with amazing midtown Manhattan views, which are right across the river, design pier structures to bring people out onto the water that you're seeing here. At the new Harlem River site, however, there's an active rail line on the water that limits the view. So we're now looking inward to turn an industrial inlet into a tidal wetland. We've done so in our larger projects outside of New York, but have not yet in the city. It's not going to be easy, so wish us luck.
Another issue we began exploring at the edge was an idea which came from the dead-end streets. As we worked on more waterfronts in New York City and noticed how common this condition was, we began a series of speculative projects which started with marine streets. Marine streets collect and filter stormwater as well as help mitigate storm surges from the river. Here's a typical before and after condition. An article outlining these ideas was published in Restoration Ecology in 2011, including drawings and plant lists for the various street configurations. This is a pattern that repeats in our work. Projects scale out to systems and research furthers it. Our project for Glimpses 2040 at the Center for Architecture, where 5 architecture firms were paired with 5 firms from Amsterdam to celebrate the 400-year anniversary of Henry Hudson sailing up the Hudson, takes marine streets further. Titled Dredgescape, an urban estuary evolution, we propose small island archipelagos all the way up the Hudson, outside of the current bulkhead line, created from dredge taken from the Hudson. These will increase the diversity of aquatic and terrestrial habitats, but also provide places of refuge for kayakers on the Hudson all the way to Troy. Marine streets also led us to the idea of forest streets as we realized the increasing effects of the urban heat island and the need for carbon sink, pollution control, and so many other benefits that trees can provide. With temperatures rising, the inequity of their absence in so many locations in the city is becoming increasingly obvious. Trees, and more importantly, forests, the more complete ecosystem, which provides increased sustainability, should be a necessary element as we replan streets post-COVID, along with cafes and other cultural spaces. We need to bring biodiversity into the cultural diversity balance. This leads to the last New York City project I want to review, our Hudson Streetscape in Hudson Square, where we tried on a small scale to bring this idea of diverse woodlands to a regular street, building on the Matthews-Nielsen master plan. This is a typical before condition with a single street tree. Our project was to create an identity for Hudson Square. Our design idea moves from a single tree to a more layered woodland. The resulting design also provides for social seating, cafes, deliveries, and bicycles, as well as a more diverse canopy and understory building on the existing street trees. The design also provides a healthier underground for the plants to thrive through increased permeability and larger soil area. So we believe that small-scale projects can bring about large-scale change incrementally through the application of systemic thinking. As we plan these systems, can we also improve the larger framework we work in to make our incremental landscapes more meaningful? At Courageous by Design in September, we proposed that New Yorkers should be able to understand where they live, so that when storms come, it is not a surprise that former wetland areas flood, as Eric Sanderson recently pointed out in a New York Times article about the terrible floods at 28th Street. The undifferentiated grid of Manhattan hides local ecology still latent in the geology, hydrology, and other site systems. This ecology should be woven into the zoning code and other regulations, not only to preserve our existing forests, but to create new performative systems which give nature agency in all public spaces, more closely reflecting the dynamic ecologies in which we live. Why not create new zoning which mandates an ecology of streets, which would include a system of marine streets, forest streets, and wetland streets? And just talking to Eric today, he suggested stream streets, which I kind of like the way it sounded. So each design would be appropriate to the location, which is with as much variety in that zoning as we allow for housing or other categories. So now to the last part 3, we leave New York City and move to see how these ideas have impacted larger projects in places like Calgary or St. Petersburg. So we'll start with St. Patrick's Island in Calgary, and this is an exciting opportunity for us to work within a river and give both ecological and cultural life back to an island and a community. It started with an invited competition to provide a new major amenity for the adjacent community, East Village, planned for a former rail yard by the Calgary Municipal Land Corporation. We asked Denver-based Civitas to join us in this Western adventure on the boat. We found the island had been taken out of the river, flattened with lawn, and also removed from the life of the city, leaving the property underutilized and scary to many folks. We created a living river and island by carving new channels across the former lawn areas, allowing the land and water to again interact and using the excavated soil to make a hill. This idea won us the competition, and we kicked off the project with the BioBlitz to learn more about the baseline ecology, working with our ecologist, Stephen Handel. In our final project design, the paths and the new water channels work together to blend the ecological and the cultural in the new plan. New uses like playgrounds and the hill are put in ecologically compromised areas, while areas of intact ecology are left undisturbed. The new seasonal breach, cut out of a former lawn, allows people to actually engage the water, to put their toes in. It's also terraced to provide for a range of activities. A wetland diversified the island ecology, bringing in other species of plants and animals, as well as a walkway for people, the only one to go across the island and out into the river. The wetland ends at a plaza nestled among the existing trees with a deck overlooking it and flexible open space for events, as well as amenities like restrooms and educational signage, and a pavilion for gathering. The extra soil dug out became a hill for festivals and events, summer or winter. with great views out to the city beyond. The living landscape with its pockets of program has been a great success, and the neighboring East Village is now almost completely built out and occupied. The challenge of working on larger sites continued to capture our imagination, and our next competition was in St. Louis. The Choteau Greenway was proposed to connect Park to Arch, traveling through the central downtown of St. Louis. This area, shown here earlier, had been cleared for a freeway, removing Mill Creek Valley, an African-American community. Not surprisingly, this rupture in the city fabric had not yet healed and created a major separation between the North and South communities in St. Louis. We seized on this opportunity to make this void into an asset and proposed a stormwater management system that would use the natural topography to collect water from the surrounding upland areas, linking North and South communities to the central public amenity in the form of a small lake and a series of wetlands. We used the elevated highway to create a path below, the symbol of destruction becoming a way forward to healing. The pond, situated adjacent to the highway and the new pathway in a property owned by the Greenway, currently a parking lot, provides over 1,500,000 cubic feet of storage, or 11 million gallons. St. Louis is undergoing the most expensive mandated cleanup in the nation at $4.7 billion for a single-use infrastructure of tunnels. The first phase is called Project Clear. The first phase will hold 12 million gallons of stormwater, not much more than our proposed pond. Our whole system will hold over 30 million gallons and would go a long way towards improving the environment culturally and ecologically, as well as mitigate the stormwater management issue. Unfortunately, this is not happening, and the 4.7 billion is not going towards any visible multi-use improvements in the city. We went on to a competition for St. Pete Pier in St. Petersburg, Florida. It's worth noting that we were invited as an architectural firm, as the brief called for the major feature to be either a renovated building at the end of the pier or a new building. Our scheme broke the rules and did not make a large building at the end of the pier. We suggested with their budget that they could do better by making a new, more diverse landscape as an attraction, a lagoon, which would improve water quality in the two adjacent basins and provide habitat and experience for city dwellers. At the end of the pier, we made a public place, a folly with no private restaurants. We put a few restaurants and other amenities at the major central plaza and at the edge to keep people moving around the park. This idea was very popular with the public, but not the jury, who disqualified us. A few months later, however, the city realized that the pier did not extend all the way back into the city. They put out another RFP to link the pier with the city, called the Pier Approach, and this time we got the project. Our job was to link the city and the pier and draw people to the water. We had a year of community engagement to plan a series of events that would link the city to the pier. Again, this involved rebalancing the circulation and making room for the pedestrian. It meant dealing with stormwater and choreographing uses in a way to enhance and encourage movement and engagement. We saw it as a chance to improve the ecology of the downtown while we were bringing the city to the pier with a series of events, creating a new heart. Building on the existing trees in the parking lot, we set the park in a native oak pine forest. The exception was the entryway to the project, which was down the former street bed seen here. Here we enhanced the non-native mature pidocarpus, the dark and dense trees, with palms to make a major statement and access to pull people through, as well as a marketplace with solar panel roof. The forest area also includes stormwater management features, which attract humans and other species.
Thank you, Barbara. I think one of the most important aspects of this project is to realize that we were creating a new park, a central park for St. Petersburg, which they currently do not have or did not have at the time. And how do we turn what was an impervious surface parking lot into a pervious surface environments, new ecologies, and stormwater management. The central feature of this lawn area is a wetlands stormwater pond that was designed to have a number of native plants and function as an emergent lagoon system, similar to what was originally proposed as a part of the competition. The pond is now a central feature and connects to the central lawn area and provides habitat for both people and birds and wildlife, which are now coming to this area and beginning to inhabit it. This idea of an emergent landscape, a landscape that envelops and surrounds, is carried throughout the park, and using the existing vegetation as a framework and backbone. You can see here large native oak trees were preserved to provide shade around the new play area, and the play area itself is surrounded by plantings, important as ways to keep the environment, mitigate the temperatures and heat of St. Petersburg. A roof over this new central lawn and park is provided by a Janet Eichelman sculpture called Bending Art. It has become both a place for people to gather and enjoy warm days, and also a place to gather in times of crisis to express their feelings and emotions about the world events going on within the world. Thank you.
Our last project is an on-the-boards look at the Riverline in Buffalo, where we collaborated with Hood Design Studio on our work for the Western New York Land Conservancy.
This project is going on currently, and I think is very important because it addresses many of the problems and many of the issues in the practice, with the idea of equity, social justice, and access to nature. The site is surrounded by three community neighborhoods: the Perry Homes, Perry community, the Old First Ward, and the Valley community. The Perry community is a traditionally African-American community. The Old First Ward is Irish, and the Valley is Polish. These communities are separated by and have not had much contact with it. But at the base, as we do in archaeology of all our sites, at the base are the native people who once occupied the land. The Buffalo Creek and the Buffalo River were once home to the Haudenosaunee Nation, and they sought refuge within these waters. The site itself has a long industrial heritage in the process of grain storage, transportation, and movement, and over the centuries has been divided and cut through the various means of transportation of that era, from canals to railroads to highways. As the industry has left, nature has once again returned, beginning to cover its environment and hiding the secrets and what lies below. The Riverline today sits along the corridor, the old Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad. Much of the vegetation is of low quality or invasive species. Our client, the Western New York Land Conservancy, has been engaged in a process since early 2017 to work with the local communities to gain their trust, to begin the process of what the community desire as they gain access to the next site. Much of the site is closed to the public. It's one of these places that people go to, but they have to climb up and through fences. So there was access for the first time, tours, community visiting sessions, determine what people wanted. And then in 2019, an international competition to bring visions and ideas. This project has been done completely within the times of COVID. And as from the interviews to jobs to conducting our outreach, has been inhibited typical ways. We've had to look for new ways to reach out and talk to communities, from small stakeholder meetings to street corner pop-ups, where we can engage people as they go about their daily chores. And these also access people that may not desire to come to meetings in the evenings. And of course, the ubiquitous Zoom digital meetings and surveys. We've also asked the community members to take their planning process into their own hands. We gave out cameras to all those that were interested and asked them to photograph their environment and how they perceive how they understand and perceive the river line, and examples from different communities. After a process of, we began asking the community, there was already lots of work done on what programs they would like, but we actually began to ask, what would they like this space to feel like? And after discussions, the clear winner was chosen. That was, from the community's point of view, they wanted this place, the river line, to be a refuge. And what is a refuge? It's a refuge for both people and animals and other and birds. And we begin a process to make it a refuge. We need to begin a process of ecological healing. Working with our ecologist, Stephen Handel, we've begun mapping the areas of invasive species and different habitats, and how, over a period of time, these habitats can be both improved, and improved in a manner that not necessarily restores them to an historic past, but it restores them to a resilient future that able to withstand and adapt to the climate that will be in the future. We're also, this refuge needs to be connected to its environment, from the parks to the existing trails, networks, and in a way that will extend this to create the equitable forest extending throughout the neighborhoods. And just recently of July, it was unveiled to the public, our vision, our concept plan.
This project includes 3 scales: the intimate scale of the path on the mound, linking to the adjacent communities and street grid, and finally connecting to the greater Buffalo. Most of the gathering is at street level, as you see in some of these renderings, at the entryways, which are generally situated on commercial streets and have a variety of programs to bring the communities together. Positioning entries and gathering in these locations helps to keep visitors out of the residential areas. The mounds are mostly left undisturbed to allow the landscape to continue to evolve along with the animals who are beginning to inhabit it. The river line ends at the river in an exciting overlook on a historic concrete bridge pylon. It will be exciting to see this project develop along with its ecology, the neighbors, and the city. In closing, as more and more of us grow up and live in cities and our increasingly urbanized environment, we believe that it is critical to find new ways to incorporate more diverse living landscapes as a part of our cultural development. Cultural and biological diversity are 2 sides of the same coin, and we need both to be healthy and thrive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. We're actually ahead of time. This never happens. I'm shocked. I'm sort of speechless, actually. No, that was really remarkable survey of a really diverse collection of projects, and a diverse number of geographic locations, kinds of clients, scales. I really appreciated that overview, and I really appreciated the sort of data, the quantitative overview that you began with. But I want to start with a question about all the ways that the world has changed in the last couple of years since you and I served on that jury together, Barbara, for the tar pits in the pre-pandemic, in the months just before the pandemic. And several of you touched on this in the presentation, both COVID and the social justice movements that rose in the wake of George Floyd's murder and other events in the last couple of years. The world, cities, how we understand them, and particularly public spaces have been rethought, as has work culture in some really fundamental ways that I think we're just beginning to understand and grapple with. So I want to start there, and I thought I would ask you, and this is to the full group, I'll give it to you first, Barbara, but I would invite your colleagues to join in as well. What have been the ways in which these larger changes have begun to reshape how you think about the work that you're doing? So maybe we can start with COVID, and that means how work culture and how firms like yours operate, but also how the public, I think perhaps more important, how the public thinks about outdoor spaces for outdoor dining, physical distancing, and other things. How many of those changes do you think will reshape in a long-term or even permanent way what firms like yours look like. And then after we talk about that a little bit, maybe we can turn to the social justice question.
It's a complex first question. Well, I was really happy to sort of feel that people appreciated the quiet. I think there was, people in cities. I mean, some people left the cities to go to quieter places, but I think the ones that remained, I think appreciated nature, and went out and heard birds. I mean, I heard a lot of comments. In fact, there was street graffiti about you can hear the birds now, and because the cars aren't going as much and streets are closed and people are staying inside. And so I think that awareness that the nature is in the city, I mean, it's all around us, and we need to pay more attention to it, is something that is good. I think we need to keep that in the forefront of our thinking, though I think it's already, perhaps, as people are ready to go back to normal, maybe fading. And I'd like to try to put a little more pressure on keeping that forward. Does anybody want to join in at this point?
I think, as Barbara was saying, it's very nice, very much the profession was put forward as something very positive to the environment and important to the future. That very much. I think cities have changed. I think the idea, there's always going to be a tension between being close, gathering together in those environments that we think, those events that we hold, the reason you're in cities, to be around, to have these mass events. There probably will continue to be a tension between, how big can we go, how much can we be together, and this desire, because I think it's really very much healthy. Your question about how has the work environment changed, I think it was obviously very difficult, I think, because we're a profession that is very much about engaging with people, our clients, and the environment, and that engagement is very hard through a computer. It's like it's a very much a false connection, and so I think when we were doing the Buffalo project, I think we tried our best, but when we were on site and meeting with people, it was so much more rewarding, and I think being able to communicate was much easier than through a screen.
And are you back in the office full time in person now? And if so, how long have you been back?
Right. Yeah, we're back. As you can see, we're all sitting here in the office, almost all of us. We've started in July. I guess that's pretty, that's when it was starting to look like it was getting better, July, if you remember. Now it's a little hard to tell, but I think everyone enjoys coming back and being together and talking, and so far we'll keep it up as long as it seems like the safe thing to do.
And we're in the midst of a conversation in Los Angeles about making outdoor dining, what we call the alfresco dining program, permanent, which is complicated from all kinds of points of view, but it certainly has there's some urban design questions at the center of that. And I think there's also beginning to be a conversation and here, and I'm curious if this is happening in New York, and if you have thoughts about this, about, we've rethought what those parking spaces, mostly places that had been dedicated to car storage, how they might support small businesses like restaurants. But I think there's a further step we could take to really rethink that space for all kinds of other uses, and maybe for small pocket parks or some kind of landscape space that isn't necessarily commercial or restaurant space. I'm wondering if you think there's a role for an office like yours to help address some of those questions about the sort of long-term shifts that we might see in how we use public space, outdoor space in a city like New York or LA.
Definitely. No, I think, I'm I love the outdoor culture. I like the cafes. I think all that is wonderful. And we worked on the Neighborhoods Now project here that the Van Allen and Urban Design Forum did, we went to Bed-Stuy to help the retail folks there be able to come out into the street more. But I do think we don't want to forget, as you said, that there's other uses, cultural and biological. We need both to have a good city. So I think that balance, I think we definitely need to think about and have as part of our toolkit, putting more nature out in the city as well. Our examples like the Hudson Square project, where we added, a more diverse, more street trees and more diverse canopy, and also the idea of really extending a variety of streets that have, the stream street, the marine street, maybe even a meadow place, and maybe it's not just in the parking, maybe there are some streets we don't really need anymore. There are in New York anyway. We've closed some streets, at least on the weekends, and a lot of people went out and played games and did all kinds of things in front of their house. So I think there, and I actually, now that I think about it, that also was happening in St. Louis even before COVID. They were closing off some of the streets. There's a lot of cities that are pretty spread out, that have a lot of area that could be reclaimed. Not saying that might be Los Angeles.
Perhaps.
Come out of COVID is that there was a spirit of experimentation, that things bureaucratically that might have taken years of thoughtful discussions and meetings were just done. And that by embracing this, that we can try things, and we can also change our mind, and bad things won't necessarily happen. I think that's coming much more in a city to New York, that it's starting to happen that way, that experimentation is good, we can try and do that, yes. And I think the whole perception of cars is changing, and that's been going on for a long time. But yes, I think that's one of the things to come out of this.
Absolutely. I love that idea of weaving ecology into the zoning code, and this idea of stream streets is really fantastic. We're in the midst of trying to rethink some of those same questions, particularly looking ahead to the Olympics in Los Angeles, which we'll be hosting for the third time in 2028. And in both earlier cases, 32 and 1984, it was really an urban design strategy around corridors, connectivity, and the life of streets that really was central to that design strategy. So we have a heritage I'm hoping we can build on. In terms of the social and racial justice reckoning, there were a number of elements in the projects that you showed that touch on that, whether it's looking at the history of freeways and displacement and Black Lives Matter protests and others. I think there can be a tension sometimes between difficult and fraught histories and stories that places need to tell and communities want to explore. And sometimes cities or institutional clients can be uneasy about using, let's say, a landscape project to open up some of those really fraught stories and histories. I'm wondering how that's played out in some of the projects that you mentioned, whether it's Buffalo or St. Louis or some other projects.
Well, I think actually in several of those projects, it certainly was not the client intent for that to happen, but these things happen. I mean, as we are facilitators, and it's part of our job to bring out what the community issues are. We're never going to be able to, solve the problems if we can't understand what it is to begin with. So, it's very important, and as part of our listening in St. Louis, particularly, it was obvious that the way that the project had been described, Park to Arch, which was going through the commercial corridor mostly, was not really the problem as most people saw it. Most people in the community saw a north-south divide. that needed to be healed, and the lack of investment in the northern, mostly African American communities. And in fact, 3 of the 4, it was a competition, so 3 of the 4 competitors, ourselves included as one of those 3, said, it's really not 2 parks, Park to Arch, it's actually 4 parks. You have 4 parks here. The other 2 are north and south, and those need to be brought into the mix. And that was actually a surprise when we all made our presentations. I think the client was a little shocked, and it took a while for them to adjust. But I will say happily that now, we're no longer working on it, but the first phase that they are working on is in the north, working to connect north to south. So, I don't think it was what anybody expected to happen, but that's sort of the job. That's the good thing. There is not an answer when we go in. You try to find out, and if they need something that isn't what you were hired to do, then, but at least you've uncovered what the issues are. So, I think, and other projects, the Janet Eckelman is called Bending Arc. Nobody in the community ever talked about the fact that there was a Supreme Court decision there in St. Petersburg that opened up beaches, racially integrated them, and that after the decision, they actually closed the beach, so they didn't have to do it. And so it's so wonderful. That this space is now really embraced by the community and has become, a totally different kind of place that everyone feels comfortable, where they come and, as David said, express their feelings, demonstrate, feel comfortable together. It's quite a change for that community as well. So it's
and I think it's a change because this is the first type of space within St. Petersburg that would allow it, that is convivial, that is large enough and centrally located rather than. So it's a new type of environment for them, and I think, as you say, there are tensions, because there's also a part of this park. Most modern current parks have some commercial activities, and people are there with their restaurants, and how do you deal with the rights of protesters and people protesting and people eating dinner, and do they have, what is the balance? How do we strike that balance?
It was even funny, our client, who's the city architect, said, "Oh my God, Barbara, what do we do? Parents are coming and dropping their kids off at the playground." More like teenagers at night. So it's become like a mall. It's become like the new place to hang out. And what do we do? And I said, "What do you mean? It's wonderful. Don't do anything." It's created. It's interesting how it changes the daytime, nighttime, different kinds of view. But I think if you make a place that has lots of different niches, it's the same for ecologies. When Jay was narrating the Edge video, what we were trying to show there was, in that small space, all the different layers that we make, that different people can be doing different things, all right next to each other in a relatively compressed space. And we try to do similar things in the bigger projects as well. Like I said, we take those and put them, expand them, so that in a space that was a parking area, and quite honestly, I think the city had rather low expectations for originally. The pier was the bright star at the end of the out at the end. But really, they say that what people think now of the heart is back, where the lawn is, and it's got the sculpture and stuff further in. So
I'm really pleased to hear you say that. First of all, teenagers are the most discerning users of any public space. So if they're finding spaces that they like and are seeking out, that's a real stamp of approval. But also in terms of just leaving some indeterminacy in terms of use, I think one of the trends that I think is unfortunate and in some recent landscape work, and particularly in memorial work, is this overly prescribed, overly labeled series of spaces that sort of take you by the hand as a visitor and take you from one space to another and tell you, now you experience this. Here's the overlook. Here's the,
Yeah.
every space becomes choreographed. And I think
Yeah.
truly successful public spaces leave a lot more openness.
Right. Yeah, we try to be flexible. Everything should be multi-use, but I mean the way they are connected is important. But yeah, you don't want it to be a prescribed path. I mean, again, multiple pathways, multiple uses, flexibility. Yeah.
So I wanted to move in to a conversation a little bit about the process in the office and how you go about choosing or pursuing different projects. You mentioned a lot of competitions, and I certainly have some questions about your critique of competitions. But before we get to that, as someone who's working on a few myself, the balance of projects that clients are coming to you for, that you're seeking out, competitions. How do you strike that balance, particularly given the kind of breadth of the kind of work you're doing across landscape and architecture?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, obviously, locally, we work for developers. A lot of the waterfront projects are actually for private clients. I mean, the Edge was for a developer. The West Harlem was for EDC, the Economic Development Corporation. But so yeah, we work with architects might call us up and bring us into a project. A developer might call us up and bring us into a project. But then we look for projects that we think we'd be good at, that we have the expertise, that we have a chance of getting selected for. So, waterfronts. And we also, want to stretch a little bit. So the competitions, I think going after those, we try to pick something where we have experience, but where would also add something that we, haven't done before. So, and you don't, we don't, I didn't tell you about the ones we didn't get in. So,
Right.
but it's fun to do them every so often, and it's even fun to do it with the other people and see what they come up with. It's always the group effort is, I like that.
Yeah, I'm curious for your thoughts about how they're structured. I think there's a very reasonable critique of some competitions that they can be exploitative of labor. They can be not necessarily presenting a level playing field. We're doing starting the process of designing a memorial for the victims of the 1871 Chinese massacre here in Los Angeles, which just had its 150th anniversary, where 10% of the Chinese population of Los Angeles was killed in a single afternoon. And what we heard from the community is that there might be some kind of a hybrid that addresses these questions, that we might first put out a request for ideas, which we're hoping to do. And then we might not ask too much in terms of polish or presentation in the first stage, and that we really reserve some of the funding for stipends for the shortlisted firms to really flesh out the proposals and have a community engagement portion of the process, so those can be presented to the public as part of a really transparent process. But I'm curious if you have sort of critiques of the process or particular approaches to competition that you think might be more equitable.
Well, I guess it depends who you're thinking of it's equitable for.
Right.
From our point of view as the person, yes, I think we are exploited sometimes, and as design firms, and but in the end, like I said, like with the St. Louis one, for instance, if it's helpful to the area, you get a lot of public, a well-run competition will get a lot of public discussion going, which can be a good thing, and it can bring out things that might not, get as much attention other ways. So I think that's the good side. I certainly have been in competitions where I've felt, and I won't say which ones, but I think that doesn't mean I think they were the wrong thing for the client to do, I guess would be what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the wrong thing for the client to do if you really need a lot of community engagement, or for instance, the River Line started with some competitions just to get some excitement. It was an open competition, but then they moved to a more traditional, RFP for picking an actual person to, firm to work on it. So I think, and I think the Highline did the same thing, for instance, had an open competition just to get excitement about the idea, and then went to a regular RFP. So I think there's all different kinds of mixtures of ways of doing it. And I guess each client has to figure out the best way for them.
Right. Let me pause here just to do two things. One is to encourage the members of the audience to put some questions in the chat. We have one that was forwarded to me, a very good question. But in a couple of minutes, we'll move to taking some of the audience questions. So be thinking of those in the next few minutes, and feel free to add those to the chat. And I also just want to encourage the other folks with you to add some thoughts if they have any about any of the subjects that we have covered so far. Okay, hearing none at the moment, I will encourage the quiet ones among you to speak up if you have anything to add. Would love to hear your perspective. I think this is something I think, Barbara, you and I talked about a little bit, perhaps in Los Angeles, but to a certain extent, the language or the terminology of resilience is shifting and giving way to other phrases. You use some of them. Adaptability is one of them. And I think particularly in era of climate change, and particularly in some of the sites where you're working on edges, waterfronts in particular, whether it's a city like New York or a city like St. Petersburg, this quality of adaptability is supremely important in designing spaces that can flood, can change quality. I think there is, of course, a really broad discourse in landscape architecture about this question. I have found since joining the public sector that there is not always a lot of openness to doing projects like that, because whether it's city attorneys or other folks or bureaus of engineering who are concerned about issues like liability and access and predictability, they like spaces that always look the same no matter what time of year. This is certainly an issue that we're dealing with in thinking about remaking our own Los Angeles River, which is channelized for all 51 of its miles. I'm curious how that plays out and whether you're seeing any shift, particularly with public clients, because it is so crucial now that we build spaces in that can be adaptable, but it's not always so easy to convince public sector clients that's necessarily the way to go.
I think it's really an education process. I mean, it is funny. People, say, "Oh, you mean it can flood and that's okay?" And it's like, yeah. I mean, land floods. It doesn't really hurt it. I mean, so I think you have to sort of go through that conversation with clients oftentimes, and of course the public too, because there's just seem to be preconceptions about, and also, know what kind of detailing is not going to get hurt by the, floods and the kind of floods a place has. I mean, some places the floods are very tear things up. I mean, you have to know what you're talking about. And like in Buffalo, there's a lot of ice, so the edges, and Calgary too, the ice, there's like ice flows, and so once you understand the actual conditions of what might happen, then you can build. I mean, the island of Calgary and the St. Patrick's Island is in a floodplain, the whole thing. So, we had to build things in ways that would not get disturbed as much as possible, which means understanding which ways water is going to flow, how you can make the water flow around it more, or, not, you don't want to make something that's going to be a dam and catch all the stuff. And, so I think it's experience in knowing what you're doing and being able to talk the client into, through that experience, that you do know what you're doing and that it can work. Now I forgot the rest of your question.
No,
I
that's...
think it depends a lot on the client that you have, but I think as this century goes on, there's been such a long preference for engineered solutions, seeing like hard walls and locks and dams, but as we see more and more of those fail, which I think we have, I really hope that there's a crack there opening where we can really convince people that soft solutions and building habitats, building wetlands can really be a much larger part of city planning and actually getting some of those ideas built.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great point. I wanted to ask a little. I think a kind of generational view of an office can be overdone sometimes, but I'm curious, particularly for the younger members of the panel, that if you can talk a little bit about the particular perspectives that you bring. I'm curious how you have responded to this, to COVID and the return to the office and sort of new ways of working. If you could address those questions about a particular perspective that you bring, perhaps as newer members of the office.
I mean, it certainly has been a very different year and a half, even for the city, just for a moment, speaking for the younger members of the office. I think even for us, I think it was for all of us, it was very challenging, because because it happened overnight. There was no transition, right? It happened very suddenly to every one of us. So there was definitely a learning curve. But I think we figured out a way together, and I think because we're a smaller office, in numbers, so I think that also gave us the flexibility to still keep the whole team more intimate and more together throughout the whole progress. So I think that we were lucky in that sense. And then it was also interesting I wanted to jump back a little bit to touch on one of the questions, that related to COVID earlier, like about, outdoor dining and, streetscape and stuff. It was really interesting for me to witness how, and realize that some of our work, has even pre-COVID, like for example, Hudson Street began, pre-COVID, it was built during COVID. The first phase opened, halfway during COVID. I mean, not halfway, we don't know when it's going to end, but, halfway through where we are now, during COVID. And like Plaza 33, which is a temporary plaza just outside of Penn Station, which is now not there now. It was the same idea. Like even before COVID, we as an office and we as as a city of New York has already begun explorations on more flexible, more temporary pop-up solutions. I mean, Hudson Street wasn't temporary; it became permanent. And I went there after the first phase opened. One afternoon, I was on a weekday. I was surprised to find that for that project, a lot of it was also trying to pack in as much as possible. We were trying to pack in more planting, but still, meanwhile, and adding in a new bike lane, preserving all the spaces for sidewalk cafes, not knowing that we're going to need a lot more during COVID. And to witness that, even during COVID, people found ways to utilize the streets, even with the more extensive planting. And, they started using some of the bike lanes, but like still keeping the delivery guys on the bikes, working, smoothly. And it made me realize that things actually can happen a lot more on the streets in our public spaces.
Right.
It can be done. Planting, stormwater management, sidewalk cafes, bikes, cars, animals, plants, they all can actually happen.
Yeah, it's just a question. I completely agree. It's just a question of rethinking how we share space and the kind of obligation we owe to the greater whole, which can be complicated, particularly in cities like LA. But thank you for that. Let's move to some audience questions. We have some really fantastic ones. I'll start with one from Diana Murphy, who asks, what is a site in New York City that you're just dying to get your hands on? And perhaps related to this, what is a project that you would like to initiate if you could?
Well, I was pretty excited about Union Square. I'd still like to. I think there's a lot of potential. Union Square and 14th Street. That whole corridor. I was impressed by. The park was elevated when the subway was built under it, and they elevated it to make a park. Originally it was a park at street level. Union Square is elevated. And, now they're trying to rethink Union Square because of some of the 14th Street becoming partially closed. I forget the technical term for what they call it. But anyway, I think they're not taking it far enough, and I'm dying to get my hands on that. Again, to get in some more green. And, I think there's just tremendous possibility there. And it's the heart of our city. I think it's a really important place, the heart, of Manhattan, or one of the hearts. It's pretty important. It's got that great market and stuff. So I don't know, I'm dying for that. What about you guys?
I think Newtown Creek in between Brooklyn and Queens would be really exciting. There's been a lot of projects about Gowanus. I know there has been work done on Newtown Creek too, but I would just like to see it get some love.
Excellent. Here's the first question that came in, and this is a really good one. It touches on some issues I was hoping we'd get to. First, it says, thank you for the overview, especially the New York and local projects. The question is, once the work engagement build out is completed, what is your longer term relationship with these sites? And I was curious also to know, how do you think about these questions of maintenance, care, these longer term questions?
Anybody want to go first?
Well, I think maintenance. I think maintenance has to evolve from, and I'm trying to find the right words to say it, has to evolve from pruning and containment to a more nuanced view of maintaining and encouraging change. Mm-hmm. Right, because maintenance is, to simplify right now for public, is about mowing a lawn. So you're containing, that's maintenance. You maintain it at a state, the same state as it was put in, and that philosophy extends to many things, and particularly with plantings, as we talk about rewilding, that's the issue that really is hard for people to deal with, because that requires education and training. It's very easy for people to show pictures of what the plants will look like and say, yes, native plants are good, this is good, but the idea is that plant will renew itself every year and will change and move and may die and other things come in, and that is okay and not a failure. It's part of what is supposed to happen. And that instead of resetting the table, going back to where constant. I think that's one of the most difficult, and I think that's where,
Yeah, I think the word maintenance is even just not so good, stewardship, although some people don't like that because, I don't know, it has other kind of overtones, but, it's really like caring, somebody caring for the place, and the place changes, different animals might move in, people has different, some plant decides it feels comfortable and starts sprouting. People have to get more involved. And I back to the question, we go back to our sites and look at them, but yeah, we're not really engaged in an official capacity. I've talked to, maintenance people on the site, and said, that's really not where the garbage should be put. That's actually a glacial erratic that we saved very carefully. It's not there to put your garbage on, And then after that, they stopped doing it. I was very impressed. They just didn't know. Nobody really tells, gives a lot of instruction. I think I really think it's something that we as landscape architects need to, get more, have to convince our clients that we need to get more involved in. Again, the St. Pete client called us up and said, "Oh, Barbara, I don't think they're doing what you really intended." Like they're sort of clipping each thing of grass around it like it's a little individual plant. And I had, he wanted us, and I went down and talked to them and tried to encourage, but then they don't want the plants flopping it all over the path, even though the path is 12, 15 feet wide. What difference does it make? But yeah, as you said, somebody might trip or something, so.
Right. And no, it's really, the budget is really the key to this question, because there has been a really robust conversation, particularly in academic circles, about maintenance and care as issues in urban design. Whether that translates to budgets and how clients are thinking of funding and conceiving of projects is a different question, of course. I want to say thank you to everyone who has turned on their cameras. It's nice to be able to see all of your faces. Last question for you. This one from the audience as well. Tell us a little bit about your partnership with Hood Design and others you've worked with, particularly asking about community engagement. But I wonder if you could talk about how what those collaborations look like, or if there are any particularly successful collaborations that you could detail in any way for us. Particularly in terms of the division of labor and sort of how you hash out who's doing what, particularly if they're two landscape offices working together.
Right. Well, that's always, we do collaborate both with other specialists like the ecologist or a structural engineer, or, but we also do collaborate a bit with other landscape architects. And, it's hard to say what the division of labor is going to be at the beginning of a project. And of course, the client doesn't want to be feeling like they're paying for overlap, or whatever. So it's always a little tricky, but usually we usually let it kind of evolve, because at the beginning you want to be brainstorming together and stuff anyway. And then you might have a general idea of where the, what direction the two firms might head in eventually. But then, as you get into the project, somebody might get attached to something in particular, or, become more engaged with it. And then, I think we like to kind of keep that flexibility so that that can play itself out. Is that too abstract of an answer?
No, that's very helpful. And just before I hand it back to Anne, any last thoughts from any of you, or any burning points that we haven't got to that you want?
I'm so happy to see some faces. I can see them all now.
Yeah, it's great to see.
Hi, Ken, Don, Molly, Pam. Hi.
Speak now, team, or forever hold your peace.
Or audience, for that matter.
Just want to say hi.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Yeah, so nice.
Let's take a little time just to say thank you, and look at all those faces and colleagues. It's really fantastic work. I think particularly in the combination of formal rigor, or all kinds of rigor, and this kind of sensitivity to this larger set of issues. It's such a tough balance to strike, and you do it really elegantly in so many of the projects. So let me thank all of you for joining us, all 6 of you, for squeezing into that one Zoom portal, and for offering such thoughtful comments, and thank all of you who joined us this evening. It's just about dark in LA, not quite. And with thanks to everyone, and thanks to the league, I'll hand it back to Anne.
And I just want to add my thanks. It's so interesting seeing not only the field of the landscapes, but thinking about how you've been engaging, boundary conditions, as well as really redefining the concept of street, mindful of the ecological, functional, and social implications of all these things. It was a fascinating presentation. We're really looking forward to the spring coming. In fact, one of the spring speakers will be Ken Smith, who's here with us tonight. So we look forward to seeing you next month with a very different kind of firm and project with future forms. And thank you all for joining us this evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a great evening.
Bye.
Thank you.